welcome to this new episode of Creative Difference. It's my great joy to be with Aude Billard, robotics professor at EPFL. We both studied physics here a number of years ago. My motivation personally was fed by an almost unlimited curiosity to learn about the world and discover things about the world. And I thought physics was maybe the field of investigation where humans had made the most concrete and spectacular progress in trying to understand the world around us. Was that a similar motivation for you, or what was your original motivation to study physics?
It's a little similar. I wouldn't say that physics is the best field to make the most advanced discovery. I'll take a more modest approach to that. I think in general everybody makes a fundamental discovery, every single scientific field, but also people, not just on a daily basis. But I had a choice between doing HEC and physics.
Okay.
HEC is essentially economics and physics. And just before I had to choose and subscribe to a field at the university, I wanted to improve my German. But I was too poor to go to the west side of Germany, so I had to go to the east side of Germany.
Oh, okay.
And the wall had just fell, and I met quite a lot of people, and among which a very close friend from Poland. And I visited Poland. I had a long vacation like any student, and that made me reflect that I didn't want to earn a lot of money. I just wanted to fulfill my dream, which was to understand things. And indeed, physics was the path. I thought studying physics, which was hard, which was known to be hard at the time, will allow me to, instead of doing math, pure math, will allow me to better understand phenomenon and to really ask the right question, pure science, science that understands phenomenon. And throughout my study in physics, at some point I also took a class that asked us to do a project, and one of the themes of the project was to talk about religion versus physics, because a lot of the physicists back then, 200 years ago, were both philosophers and then physicists. So I had a professor who used to say you cannot be a physicist without being a philosopher. And I think he was right, because you have to ask fundamental questions. But then similarly, there was another professor who said, how do you put God in this story? And I was not a believer, so I was curious. And that made me, do a lot of research on that in physics and going up to cosmology, actually, to really ask the key question.
Okay.
Does it start? Does it end? What is the true question? Is it the what? Is it the how? Is it when? Is it why? And I think physics answers what, answers how, answers when, but does not answer the question why. Why are we here?
Yes, physics is mostly focused on how phenomena works, how the world works, what is the mechanics behind things.
Yeah.
But the why is inaccessible to such investigations and belongs indeed to theology or to other fields.
Oh no, maybe not.
Or maybe not, yes.
Maybe science should expand, and perhaps 200 years ago or more than that, the fact that physicists were also philosophers,
Right.
They were not shying away from the question of the why, and they were mixing the two questions.
Right, yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because if you start all the way back in Western civilization with the ancient Greek philosophers, they were in fact also scientists and mathematicians and everything at the same time. Then specialization arrived, and then people started to misunderstand each other. What happened also is at the beginning of the 20th century, there were major breakthroughs that were at the border between physics and philosophy, you could say, so the theory of relativity, but also quantum mechanics. But then their discovery was so powerful that it put a lot of work on the table. And then throughout the rest of the 20th century, people just calculated. And so it's the Feynman shut up and calculate type of approach. And then, because if you do this for a few decades, then you lose touch with what is really interesting in the other side, in philosophy. And nowadays, it feels that most scientists are not at all interested in philosophy, which is, as you say, maybe a pity. But at the same time, quantum mechanics seems to say, well, you have to actually be interested in philosophy.
Yeah, I think so. But worse than that, they are not being taught. And they are not.
Yes.
This the fact that people look only at a very narrow field be it physics. If only physicists were, or roboticists, or AI, or computer scientists were looking at the entire domain.
Right.
We're not anymore. And that's due to something else, which is something I've been discussing quite a lot recently, is the paper deluge. It's really a deluge of number of publication.
Right.
No human being can read all of that anymore. Not even in your subdomain, you can read everything. Just in my subdomain, which is not the biggest one in robotics, if I just look at robot learning, which is, you know, anything that has to do with teaching a robot, just in 1 year, we have 70,000 publications.
70,000 in 1 year. That's enormous.
It's enormous. It's unrealistic that scientists progress at that pace. We're sidetracking a little bit, but this has led to a point where I'm here. I did exactly what I aimed to do, which was to study physics, and then I continue my dream by moving to AI, and then through the implementation of AI in robots, and having just always a continuum between what I do every day is differential equations, studying them, but also implementing them as algorithms, and then implementing it on actual robot that move, which is very similar also to the study of humans, because if you want to move a robot, then you have to understand how species move. But then we're so busy publishing, we're so busy acquiring funding, we're so busy doing so many different things, that when do we step back and think about what are we doing? You know, what knowledge do we gain? Also, that's another thing that worries me, is that I started in physics. I'm so glad you're asking me why. Because I wanted to understand. That was my goal. I wanted to better understand the world. And every day I see people publishing papers. They're just caring about things to work. That's the key word today. In AI, in robotics, things have to work.
It has to work.
What does that mean? Work. It's not a scientific word, and they're losing track of understanding
the fundamental questions.
Key in science.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things here. So yeah, maybe let's come back to your original motivation. So you say you have this kind of deep desire to understand the world at a fundamental level. Is it also something that informs your research in robotics? Are you, in a sense, trying to discover like the fundamental laws of robot learning, for example?
No, if only. I mean, at some point, yes. At some point, we had one of those beautiful grants, which was my dream, to understand how people learn and transfer that to robots.
Okay.
So, you know, really, the question of, so we started with an example, because always when you have a grant, you have to have an example. So an example was very Swiss. It was watchmaking. It's a craft.
Okay.
Right? It's not very high level. But for roboticists...
Well, it's pretty high level. I'm sure it's like very hard to make.
They have to insert things at, you know, almost, I mean, sub-millimeter or millimeter level.
Okay.
The forces, it's 10 minus 2 Newton to measure the forces when you apply them. So question is, how do they feel that?
Right.
It's such a small force. How did they manage to change the way that they process tactile information in their brain in order to feel this? And how do they know how to manipulate all of these objects? And it seems that the key question from a roboticist is how do you play with your hands in such a way that you place them at the right place to have the right sensation, and so that you fulfill the task. And it's a multi-degrees of freedom problem. People do that, and they exercise themselves over and over again, and they find a solution. And what I was interested in understanding is, how do they find a solution? This process of learning, this process of finding the right thing. How do you get to learn how to move your body in such a way to fulfill the task? That means you start having a model of what the task is about, what the constraints are about.
Right.
From a mathematical viewpoint, it's really not that trivial. Because you have to learn about, think of it, can I be mathematical or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you have to define, for instance, the objective function implicitly. What are you optimizing for?
Yeah.
Minimum of energy? Really? I mean, talk to a surgeon. Do you think that this minimum of energy, they spend 16 hours? Maybe it is. The amount of force that you apply, clearly, but in which direction? I mean, sometimes you have to apply it. So what is the objective function you are optimizing? You have to learn that for any single task. You have to learn what we call the constraints. Implicitly, are they inequality constraint or equality constraint? For instance, when I want to put, my body along this is an equality constraint, right? I have to find where my elbow are gonna touch.
Right.
So it's a single point. It's an equality. So how do I find out which posture I need to adopt for my body to fulfill that equality constraint? Some part of my body, any for that matter, or maybe some of them, not all of them, need to be in contact with this part of the chair. It seems trivial. It isn't. Trying to control a robot to do that is not trivial. Why? Because, first of all, there are an infinite number of points here. So which one will you pick? And how do you move there? For instance, this seems trivial to go under the object. But you have to control, these are inequality constraints. You cannot go through this, you have to go below or above. It's an either or. And then you have to convert that into motion of your body, which is a high degree of freedom. I'm sure that if I force myself, I can squeeze myself under this. How do I manage to compute this?
Right.
This seems absolutely trivial. And still I can tell you that for robotics, it remains very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's quite beautiful is that some things that we take for granted in everyday life is in fact very difficult and in a sense very beautiful, and maybe we needed millions of years of evolution to perfect such motions, and then we don't have to think about them anymore. But this is exactly the type of light that scientific research can shed on the world and on our lives, our existence, is that in fact what we do is quite wonderful, and the more we research, the more we discover how beautiful this is. I think there's a scene in a movie by David Cronenberg, Existence, where it's about basically like a video game that's so perfect people lose track if they're in the game or out the game, this kind of sci-fi thing. And there's a character who is actually the game designer herself. Right. And at some point there's a scene where she takes a little rock and she throws it at a wall or something, and it goes bing, and you see her smile. And you understand she's happy because the simulation is so beautifully working that when you throw a little rock, it goes bing, and it's super beautiful. And I think this is a very interesting moment, because science is not just, can we achieve this or that technological feat or move people faster to their jobs and back, this kind of thing. It's also how much we can wonder at the world we are in. In fact, what you're doing is trying to artificially reproduce some things like simple motions that we take for granted, and through this process you reveal how elegant and sophisticated and beautiful they are. Is this something that resonates with you?
Definitely, but also there is always this pendant in my work, but also in other roboticists' work, is to ask, is the human solving it this way? Or are animals solving it this way?
Right.
And if not, then what are the tricks that they have in their brain, which is much smaller than all the AI tools that we have today? But they still solve this problem so easily.
Right.
So we still don't have an answer for that, but we're trying. So when we model it mathematically, at least my approach to modeling it, even though we use AI, is always to go with the simplest model.
Right.
To become as close as possible, potentially, to the model we have in our brain. Because yes, evolution played a role, but for human being, we know that most of it is learning.
Right.
Right, because the baby, when the baby
they're not agile.
is born, they're not agile. They cannot do any of that, but they learn very rapidly.
Right.
So it could be that some of it is shaped by the evolution, the way that the brain grows. But in other words, there have been so many examples where, unfortunately, when children were deprived of some capabilities, then they did not develop them properly. Right. So this question we try also to answer it slowly with collaboration also with neuroscientists or with people modeling human motor control, acquisition, skill acquisition. But we are making so tiny steps towards a real understanding of how humans manage to do those things in such a short amount of time.
Right.
Even if I take the watchmaker, yes, they do practice for 2 years in a row. Okay, sure. We are now working with Microsurgery, and it's the same. They do practice also. and they learn to do something that is even more complex because it's again very tiny forces, tiny movements, but with deformable objects, which changes the shape as you deform them. You cut, you cut an organ, then suddenly you have a lot of liquids coming in, so all the interactions are completely distinct from what you had at the beginning. So you have to model the deformation of the organ, the fluid. All of your brain is modeling all of this, and they acquire that skill relatively rapidly. If you count the number of hours they spend and you compare this with the number of hours, the GPU time that you spend in AI to train robots. So we're still super slow. I mean, it looks as if AI is fast, but actually it's slow in GPU time if you compare that to the time it takes for humans to acquire the same skill. So we still don't understand well what are the tricks that the human brain is using. So what I was telling you earlier on is that, yes, AI stores everything, but the human brain stores the essential because it cannot store everything. But perhaps by doing that, also the process to choose the essential, which it does not always, that's the key. And we still don't understand that. It's the key. How is the brain choosing to look at certain variable and not others? I take the example again of putting just my elbow here. Why does it choose to put my elbow? Not this, not that, not any other part of the brain. This segmentation, it's immediate. It's clear to our brain what we can do and what we cannot do. Also this distinction in a very high dimensional representation. And yes, we did acquire that for 20 years or more. I mean, certainly for the first 12 years of our life, mostly, but yet it's, how did we do that? Nobody knows today.
Right. Yeah, it's probably the human brain is the most complex system in the universe. It has so many, well, neurons, but mostly connections between neurons, and so many possibilities to fire and to generate representations and actions that, it's still something that is very far from our understanding. And indeed what you're trying is requires, in part, maybe to unveil how this functions. But in fact, if you think about flight, planes in the end, early planes were maybe trying to reproduce birds and with wings flapping, and what ended up working was just like rigid wings and like powerful engines. And so
but on that, by the way, now the new drones have flapping wings.
Yeah, I read in one of your papers that you mentioned wings. Yeah, that's very interesting. Does that lead to some advantages?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
More agility, better energy efficiency, this kind of thing?
Yes.
Interesting. So maybe the first solution was a bit like brute force because we had engines and we could just like do it with like planes. But you could also say this with artificial neural networks. So of course they were originally inspired by biological neural networks, but then they kind of simplified a lot of things, and they are now really quite different from what's happening in the actual biological neurons. But they do work, and they do manage to produce similar results.
They do work.
Yeah, I fell into the trap.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, what does it mean?
Okay, so they do manage to, let's say, produce outputs that are at the level of what you would say an intelligent person would also say.
And by doing so, by creating this, what has become a black box, we have lost key of the key question. Understanding. Have we understood better the way that they learn? Not so much. People are doing reverse engineering now to try to understand how can such a, huge deep learning, so deep neural network and with many layers, how come that they can actually learn that quickly and so much? And it's bizarre because we've created that and now we're trying to understand how this happens to be that powerful. So we haven't progressed in our understanding. We've created something beautiful,
right,
very powerful, but we don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so science has progressed, but has almost given itself a more challenging thing, a second species that it needs now to understand.
But it's almost like an emergent phenomenon. So maybe you could compare this to temperature or to thermodynamics. So if you measure the temperature of this room, you could say, well, we don't really understand why it's this temperature, and we might want to have a picture in terms of all the atoms and the molecules moving in this in the air in this room, which might give us a fundamental understanding. But I don't know if the fact that something emerges like this sort of artificial intelligence in a huge neural network without really us understanding, I'm not sure if it's really a limitation or it's not just nature works this way.
So that's a question I've asked myself.
Right.
At some point, do we have to use deep learning or neural networks or AI in general to understand phenomenon that physics, traditional physics, could not explain, or traditional biology, so with traditional equation? Have we reached the limit of our traditional physics, and then have we reached the limit of our own intelligence? And then we need to develop another intelligence to understand the next level, meaning we need another species.
Another species. So how do you imagine this other species? Will it be like an augmented species or something really totally different?
But I mean, your company is trying to bring us to another level, right? You see the limit of our intelligence. And you're helping us to become more, smarter, let's say.
Yeah, okay, so we're trying to use AI to help human beings learn more efficiently. But the way we see it is that it will allow us humans to become more human. The human species was so successful because it had this ability to learn and to invent, to create, and then to accumulate knowledge and culture and technologies and so on. And I think if we can use the power of AI to enhance this process, then it's really making us more human, not creating another species.
Really? More human in which sense?
It depends your definition of human, but my definition is that we're the species that learns very well. And so if we learn even better, this would make us more human in that sense. And also we're the species that discovers all the richness and the beauty in the world. And anything that enhances this process makes us more human and more harmoniously in phase with the world, let's say.
Okay, I would love to understand better what your technique is, to be very sincere.
So yeah, we can discuss this afterwards,
nice.
With pleasure, yes.
Yeah, because I'm wondering how humans can augment their capability of learning or use their capability in better ways, which is very interesting.
Right.
But again, if I take the example of AI, would you say that AI is smarter than humans today?
Smarter?
Or capable? Well, let's say smarter. I don't know what smartness means. So take that
away. So it's a matter of definitions.
Capable of learning faster in terms of the regular time. It depends on our clock, let's say, our biological clock, certainly, yes, and more. So if it was put this ability to learn so rapidly, and this ability to store everything, if we manage, everybody tries that in the world, if we manage to put that in artificial being, be it a robot, capable truly of staying in the world for a long period of time. I'm not talking about this ridiculous robot that we see in factories that are pushing things like this, look like human. This is ridiculous. Imagine a robot that can do things that no species can do, which is possible in robotics.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, it's flying and then turning. We have some small example of this. Flying with simply the quadrature, and then it lands and turn these 4 helix into wheels, because essentially if they're rotating like that, they can rotate like that, and then drive. We have example of things that can walk and then swim. And for robotics, it is possible to change shape, to go from a walking machine to a flying machine, to a swimming machine. All of this is possible. The hands that we've developed is a crawling hand, which is not unlike our hand. We have developed a hand which has all fingers are thumb. Well, actually, it can have 8. It can have as many as you want, and all of them are thumb, and it can grasp on both sides. Because robotics can do that. So imagine a being that has a body that can do all of what you see outside: swim, fly, walk with 2 legs, walk with 4 legs. Has does not have our problem. Again, I don't understand those humanoids that look like us and have only eyes in the front, can see backwards, can see forwards, can see through walls, which is totally feasible. All of this is feasible in robotics.
Yeah.
You give this, and you give it the AI today. You have a new, assuming that can last today with batteries and all of this, it doesn't last, but there are, in a number of years, if we progress at the rate at which we progress, probably in 50 years or maybe 101, if we can survive that long, that's another problem, that will exist with materials that can regenerate themselves. That will be a new species. Will that species be capable of understanding better, understanding this rule? Like you said, you took a fantastic example. Temperature of this room, we still don't understand that. Meteorology, we still don't have a very good grasp of that. Climate change, we do understand part of it, but not all of it, because it's so complex. Particle flying, you know, what is happening in the world, where do they come from? I mean, all of this mix, that, you know, the fluids.
It's very chaotic, it's very hard to predict.
It's extremely difficult to predict. Will that new species with this new brain capable of?
Yes.
And I'm saying one, and we still think of one single thing, but the hand we developed can detach. So that one thing could detach into multiple things and then regroup. There are some scientific fiction movie, but these science fiction movie are always ahead of what will come, and they're very good at this. This is in the realm of the possible, not today, but in a relatively short period of time from now. Again, not you and me will not see that, but probably 2 generations from now.
So let me try to see if I understand. So you're saying that the human species has certain possibilities of interacting with the world, with the senses that we have and the bodies that we have, and that led us to a certain level of understanding of reality, of the physical reality or of the world in general. And you're saying maybe if there's another species that emerges, maybe robots, maybe something like that with other senses, other abilities to act, maybe both flying, swimming, walking, these kind of things, maybe this leads to another deeper or just different understanding of the world from which we could also benefit.
Yeah, and imagine that they can all be connected through one single huge sort of brain.
Yes.
They all share the information at once.
Right.
Like this. So those that are in, I don't know, in Africa, and those that are in Australia, and those that are in Antarctica, they can share all at once information about what they perceive with their multiple type of sensors. It's going to go faster.
Yeah. So
we'll start building a complete understanding of really what the Earth looks like. It's as if you had eyes that could see many different places at once. Here, and then the kitchen, and then the other parts, you will have a better understanding of the life of this lab, right? Than us being in just this office, and we may guess what's happening in the other office, we have no idea.
Right. So I think this is a very interesting and very plausible thing, that we might learn things from future entities that have a different interface with the world, and therefore build world models that are different, richer, and instructive for us. But I think also it will always be something that we will be able to integrate. So some people love to think that if we had different senses or something, we would have a worldview that is completely incompatible. They would see like extra dimensions and like magical interactions or action at a distance or whatever. But I don't think this is possible. I think there was a breakthrough in this development of intelligence that human species is at the forefront of. And this breakthrough unlocked infinite understanding capabilities. So we've
managed. Do you really think so?
Yeah. I think we have an infinite. It's like some sort of Turing machine. You can really understand with our brain any abstract idea or concrete idea. And I don't think we're limited. And what makes me think this is that we have this ability, which is quite amazing, which is imagination. And so what you described to me, for example, the robot that can detach limbs and fly and see through walls, I can imagine exactly what this feels like. Another more extreme example that I love is that dogs, of course, have a sense of smell that's very advanced, and their nostrils are sufficiently far that they can smell in 3 dimensions. So not only do they smell much more than us, but they can say, I smell this there from this direction, I smell this from there. So it's like our visual sphere around us. They have this kind of smelly sphere around us.
Which may be good or bad.
Yeah. Depending where you are, yeah. And so this is absolutely amazing. And so for us, vision is so important that it's hard for us to even think, what does it mean if your primary sensory organ is smell, and it's in like a 3D kind of smell? But still, if you think about it long enough and try to imagine, you can imagine it. And therefore, I think even if it's the weirdest thing, we can always use our imagination to go anywhere in the universe and to understand everything with enough creativity and playfulness, in a sense. So we have to break kind of a Cartesian, maybe a pedestrian way of thinking.
Wow, you have a lot of faith in us.
Yeah, no, yeah, I love human beings. I'm very confident we're the best. But I think we can be
the best of what exists today.
Better.
But what I'm telling you is that the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come. Yes, it's quite possible. It might also be us, but a better version of us.
That's right. I mean, that's what we're doing with teaching other human beings.
Right.
I mean, the capability of human beings, or at least the knowledge, the average knowledge that every single human being has increased over the decades. So
yes.
Parents, let's say teachers or whatever, society teach the others. So that's what you're doing with your society, is essentially trying to bring more knowledge into this species and allow the species to acquire that faster. But on the other hand, we have lost a lot of other knowledge on the way. We are incapable, for instance, of feeding ourselves. We are incapable of
feeding ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if there was no food anymore.
If we were in the wild, you mean we would not survive?
No, we don't understand nature anymore.
Yeah.
I'm really very bad at getting any plant growing. Even though I can do very complex mathematics
of
and
life and death, like you would manage, I'm sure.
Because you choose, because you have. So we are not. We are maybe infinite in our ability to model things. I love the way that you phrase it.
Yes.
I don't know. I need to reflect on that. I don't know if this is true. But maybe it is. But still, we are very segmented. We can learn that.
Yeah, we're very segmented or siloed, yes.
We're siloed because our brain can just not.
And as you mentioned earlier in a letter you wrote in Science or something, you were finishing by saying that indeed the different fields of robotics are very siloed. And even in the way that it's taught, we start by like a course about robot hands, and then it's a different course about locomotion and different. And so it creates those compartments in the mind, and then people decide to push in one direction and specialize, losing track of the big picture. Yes. But also I loved in some of your recent letters and articles, you mentioned that there is a trend and advantages to have a more holistic approach to robotics. So it's not just, for example, if you want a robot that can walk to the desk and then grab something on the desk, you don't have two different systems, one for locomotion, the other for grasping. You have like the same and unique system, like your detachable hand that can both use the fingers or legs to walk or to crawl, but also to grasp things and then carry them while crawling away, this kind of thing. And maybe unifying this is a much more powerful approach.
I think so. And talking about the human again, always bringing us back to us, if we are the supreme intelligence. Maybe. That's what we do all the time. Imagine for some reason your hands are frozen. You cannot use them, which happens, right? But you need to pick up something. What are you going to do? You're going to use the rest of your body, right? And if need be, you're going to use maybe your leg to support, as a point of support.
Right.
I mean, I had 3 kids, so I do remember that. You have to carry them there, and then you have to carry all the rest, and we can do so many things. We can use our heads. This ability to think our body, and again, it's the same as what I was saying before, is that it's a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, we stand on 2 legs, etc., but if need be, we can crawl. Mm-hmm. But we cannot really walk on our hands because we are not trained at doing that. But should we really have to do that, could train ourselves to do that.
Yeah, some people manage.
Some people manage. So again, going back to the key question, this notion of intelligence, this ability to imagine all of this, the key is learning.
Right.
How is the brain learning, acquiring these representation, playing with them, modifying them?
So maybe it could be useful to define like a framework for what you're trying to achieve with your research. So how would you say is the holy grail, or like what is the mission that you're trying to accomplish?
Today, I must say I'm fighting with all the researchers in my lab to allow them to get to a conversation like the one we have today, which I really enjoy.
Okay, great.
Super difficult. People are too much into
like a higher level kind of
such a narrow little problem.
Right. Okay.
Trying just to solve that very narrow problem.
Right.
And to step back, of course, I'm in the right position to do that because luckily I've seen a lot of things. So the holy grail, I would be very modest. I mean, in a career of one scientist, one cannot do huge amounts, but if at least we could have a tiny bit of an answer as to how is the human really learning, just this small part. How is the human really making sense of all these high-dimensional worlds and narrowing it down to sub-manifold? More than that, I would like to understand how the human starts with some knowledge of how to use your hands, for instance, and gets them to do something completely different. So you have to change your representation, even though you're using the same thing in contact with, be it play piano or some instrument. If we could just have some small understanding of this in high dimension. Of course, there is some understanding of learning for extremely narrow type of example task, like just hitting a golf club and okay, how do you manage to change the impedance and the speed and all of this? But when you go high dimensional, so many, here you have 22 or 28, depends on who you're talking to, degrees of freedom, not to mention all the degrees of freedom in this perception of force in your fingers. And then you have the world that you're working with, and I take the example of the microsurgeon that are working with organs that deform. No two organs are exactly identical, they have different, slightly different shapes, different color and stuff, and still, they manage to suture this correctly.
Right.
Still, they manage to not penetrate, another organ. So just understanding how the human brain managed to do that, to get this representation, this imagination of what will happen that you cannot see because it's inside the organ.
Right.
But that's because of this imagination. You touched the right point.
Right.
It's because we can imagine what we cannot see, and because you can build this, what they call motor imagery, this image of the world that you cannot perceive. That is our intelligence. But what I'm interested in trying to model somehow is this capability. And then always testing it with robots. So it's true that everything that we develop, we try often to develop a pendant with the robot. It's not exactly the same. It's a little bit like the neural networks. What we have, our equation, they're too simplistic. They represent what my brain does when it moves an arm with a single equation. It's a one-line thing. Clearly the brain is not doing that. But so yes, we try to do the two back to back. So today, for instance, we work a lot on constraint learning. As simple as this is. How do I learn just a constraint? Equality, inequality. And then how do I transfer this? I have all those robots not for nothing. They look similar, and they're all different body.
Yes.
Right? But they are used in the industry. By the way, it's the same for humanoid robot. You buy humanoid robot number 1 from company A, and then suddenly for some reason you want to upgrade, right? So you're going to buy the new version from company B. They're going to have different body. How do you transfer what this robot knows to this one? Different body.
Right.
So that's the two small thing that we're working on, is this question of extracting the constraints and transferring the knowledge. It's called transfer learning, but it can also just be transfer of knowledge.
Yes.
How do you do that? Kinematic is already difficult, but we just got a paper on this with an analytical solution to transfer, which is small, but only for 6 degrees of freedom arm. So it's very simple. Analytical
solution to transferring the kinematics from one robot to another one.
More than that, let's say you've run to do a pass. I don't know, maybe you're you're picking up packages, right?
Yes.
And then to transfer that to any of our robots. Or you're throwing things like this, and then you want the other robot to throw like you did.
So the robots might differ by
Because
the
it doesn't
arms
have
and
the
the
arm.
articulations.
Exactly. Not the same number.
They have the same number of articulations?
Not the same number.
Ah, okay.
Not the same number. That's the difficulty. Often they don't have the same articulation.
Okay.
The kinematic is very distinct, very different. They are attached differently.
Right.
So
And
it's not the same motion. You need to map that to another body.
The potential movements of one robot to another one.
Think of teaching a dog to throw the same way as a human does. You see the paw of a dog does not have as many degrees of freedom as the human arm.
Yeah. Yeah, they would struggle with it. Yeah. But
but it's even worse for perception.
So you know that
if you see things with your eyes, you don't know if I see things the same way with my eyes.
Right.
And from one robot to another one, from this camera to another type of camera, it's not going to be exactly the same. From one audio system to another one, it's not going to be exactly the same. So you have this, what we call the correspondence. It seems trivial, it isn't. How do we transfer knowledge? It's the notion of representation. How do you go from one type of sensor to another type of sensor? How do you adapt? It's an adaptation mechanism, which we have to do constantly. When we grew up, we had to learn to do the same task with limbs suddenly that were longer. More powerful.
Yes.
And if you observe children, when they grow up, especially those who suddenly grow up very rapidly, they hit themselves constantly everywhere.
Right.
They hurt themselves constantly. Yeah. I'm sure it must have happened to you. And when we become older, it's the same problem. So we do adapt to this change in our dynamics and kinematics, but these are very small changes. So
understanding, quite slow,
understanding how we do that with the brain and understanding how we can transfer that to robots is another thing that's I'm hoping that we can shed some light on. So it's not really a holy grail, it's more small step towards this big understanding of how do we learn in the first place.
Right. And how do you measure the success? It's just the fact that the grasp works?
Yeah, the task.
The task is successfully executed. Successful.
Yeah, so we had simple throwing, grasping,
but it's not
place.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it's typical industrial task because
you have
it's
like a taxonomy of tasks that you wanted to be able to reproduce.
When you have the solution analytically, it can be anything now.
Ah, right. So it seems like a very powerful approach where you can do any task.
But it's not deep learning.
It's not deep learning.
That's the interesting part, right?
Yeah.
One can still do things with pure math.
Interesting.
Very hard problem. Of course, you can solve it with deep learning as well. You could train.
Right.
But then you will not have understood. When you write it mathematically, we have the impression, it may be a wrong impression, that we understand how to do it.
Yes.
Maybe it may be incorrect, by the way, but at least we grasp that. So basically, it's all about singularity. So you can singularity in the arm is typically when you're in that deadlock, you cannot move anymore here.
Right.
I mean, you're at the edge. So there are many singularities, and these differ depending on the kinematics. But you can express them explicitly. If you can write an equation that models the boundary of the singularities, then you can start thinking about what happens in one side of the boundary and in the other side of the boundary. Of course, it's an equation that we have the impression to understand, but we don't really understand. It's an equation, so you write it, and it's in high-dimensional space, 7-dimensional space. So even here, our imagination fails. As an example, I was going to say, I'm not sure that our imagination is that good. Can you really imagine what your body is doing inside the body? Imagine, I'm just simplifying it, but we're at least 60 dimension, if I'm just talking about the joint, not even about the muscles.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think if I try to imagine exactly which muscles I have to move to now stand up and get a coffee,
you can't.
It's just so hard. I mean, even like the slightest thing, like what do I need to like raise my arm? Like which muscles do I start with? It's just impossible to imagine. And I think it's because I think in learning, usually there's an explicit conscious phase where like if you learn an instrument, for example, you practice deliberately and you know, oh, here I'm doing this, I know why I'm doing it and so on. And then with practice, then you do it automatically, you don't have to think about it anymore. And it's the same for An example is like chess. So if you're a chess grandmaster, you look at the board, you immediately know, your intuition tells you how to evaluate the situation, also what are the promising moves and so on. But the thing is that with this type of intuition, you can ask the grandmaster, say, can you explain why you feel that? And they could probably explain everything. Maybe it would take them like an incredible amount of time. Maybe it would take them 2 hours to explain something they saw in 3 seconds. But still they could explain. Whereas with actual body motions, it seems that we've learned it at such early age. And it's so intuitive and so deep in the way our brain is wired and so on that we cannot explain it anymore. But I mean, it might be simply the fact that what we mean by explaining is actually putting things into words. So this means that it's close to some sort of abstract representation, whereas moving your leg is something very concrete that is quite far from the world of words. So maybe it's just this distance.
It could be, but
Yeah.
because we don't have this explicit, let's say, logical understanding of it, we
Right.
have difficulty understanding other species when we watch them.
Right.
Can you understand how the octopus works?
Right.
Can you imagine how it works?
Right.
Barely. You can probably imagine a movie that you've seen,
Right.
but you cannot picture it yourself. You cannot embody that and imagine how you're going to move your tentacles plural.
What it feels like to have those
What it feels
tentacles
like.
and the.
Because you're going to have many more than just your 2 arms and 2 legs, so
Yeah.
more than 4.
I
You
mean,
cannot imagine how it perceives the world, which, by the way, I don't even know how it does.
I mean, this is a very hard imagination exercise, but yeah, it's definitely at the limit.
So I'm questioning your statement that we're
Yes.
unlimited. But I'm questioning it, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe in it. So I'm asking myself, could we
Yeah.
train ourselves? Could
To
we train ourselves?
Extend our imagination.
I mean, some people are doing that. And with for instance, the third arm or 4-arm project, when you attach robotic arm to the person so that you can have more arms.
Yes.
And so people get used to that. Or you've seen this example where you attach one more finger to a person and then the person learns to use that finger,
Right.
that additional finger. So maybe indeed, we're unstoppable.
Yes.
Or not, I don't know.
So I think maybe one framework that could be useful, because it's very simple, but it's very rich as well, is the framework used in active inference, for example, where basically you split the situation into one system and its environment. Or you could say one subject and then the objective world around it. And then there is this clear boundary between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to understand how the system can interact constructively with its environment. And so in active inference, what happens is that in the inside, the system builds a model of the world. And so it's trying to predict what the world is like, and then it can perceive things from the world, but it can also act in the world. So I think this kind of simplifies the situation and applies to AI and robotics and also human mind quite generally. So it's like a universal approach, and even in philosophy and so on with the subject-object distinction. So it seems to me that what you're describing is that you're changing kind of the system itself, you're changing its agency potential, so how it can interact with the world, but also you're changing its sensory potentialities. So how can it perceive the world around it and maybe see, maybe touch, maybe X-ray vision or all sort of things like this. So maybe there's kind of a continuum of progress that could be achieved there. So what we've seen in recent years or decades with AI and artificial neural networks was a system that was in fact very minimal. It just lives in a digital world, and its input is maybe like words or tokens or things like this, and then it has a world model. In this case, it only means it has some understanding of language and maybe reasoning, this kind of thing. And then the output would just be like the next word or something like this. And then it applies also to images or pixels or videos and so on. And what happened that was quite spectacular, starting with the transformers and the breakthroughs that followed, is that those systems were able to build very rich and very complete models of the world, only based on language. And nowadays, they're also increasing their agency. So you have AI agents that can not only click on websites, but also like run like terminal commands and things like this. So it feels like maybe there's kind of a continuum, and maybe if they can print something,
Yes.
well, it's in the real world already. So you consider a printer as kind of a robot. I think that you don't really think of robotics as being so parallel to this evolution of AI. What is your perspective on this approach?
Wow, there are so many, I don't know where to take it. When you say what is my perspective on this approach, on using like transformers, AI in general, LLMs for training robots, we do use that from time to time. We do.
But do you think there's one fundamental setup, which is a system that tries to learn a world model in order to better perceive and act? And that this can start with LLMs, and then you can enrich it all the way to a fully humanoid robot.
So this is a dispute. Huh? There was a beautiful debate, if you want to watch it, there was a debate on AI versus, let's say, traditional engineering, or I don't know what they call it. At the last large conference, ICRA 2025, it was fun because we were 6 or 7 professors fighting in front of everybody. Yes. So my opening, we each had an opening speech, and I remember that I opened the thing by saying, they're wrong, and we're right, and then everybody laughed.
Well, it's good to have due attention sometimes, yeah.
I mean, it's an open question. I don't have a belief at the minute. But I have doubt that without really acting and closing the loop in the world, it's going to be sufficient. So, and this massive, today you have people massively recording data. You have this, you've seen like 100 people teaching robots in China primarily. You haven't seen that? They're wearing everything, they're wearing exoskeleton, gloves, and then they're doing manual, they're doing the dishes, they're doing manual things that you do every day in your house with the hope that, and they're recording all of that with the hope that some intelligence will emerge from that. And of course, they're all different people, they're humans, of course, but they're still different size, different strengths, etc. And that this generalization will emerge from this, which is a little bit the way that you're approaching the problem, is that then you put all of this measurement, this representation, you build a representation of the world, and then you can act on it. And maybe they're closing the loop, I don't know, because it's a company doing that, so we don't exactly know what they're doing. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Why I'm not doing it in my lab? I'm not interested. Because I'm not interested in getting things to work. I'm not interested in getting a big brain doing inference that have no myself understanding of how it came to be in the first place. Aside from saying, I trained for that many number of hours, I put that many neurons. That is not understanding how it achieves this.
So it's not intellectually satisfying to have this type of approach?
It's not just this. I feel that I will be failing those who pay me.
Okay.
I feel that's my role in the university. I may be wrong. My role with respect to the taxpayer that put a lot of money here is to bring knowledge, a better understanding of the world.
Right.
And it's not to build something that I have no control over. Okay.
So not just to bring new tools and services that work as you say, but because this would be more like a commercial engineering approach, maybe.
That would be engineering. I think the role of science, that's not the role of science.
You're trying to get to a fundamental
but
understanding of knowledge.
I may be wrong. That's maybe my training, and maybe that's obsolete. Like thinking that the equation explain better than using a neural network.
Uh-huh.
Why? I mean, an equation speaks maybe to me because I practice it,
Uh-huh.
to you because you've been trained, but sincerely for the rest of the world, not so much.
Right, but the equations have personalities. I mean, you can then reformulate them into words that everybody can understand. But sometimes you have to create new concepts. Then it's an enrichment that is accessible for everybody, I think.
A neural network is an equation, right? When you read it, it's going to be a
Yeah.
very, very, very long equation, but it's going to be an equation.
Yeah.
Yet we fail at turning that into words. Maybe that's the parallel. Maybe that's the parallel to. Maybe it's the level of complexity
Mm-hmm.
where traditional language and traditional understanding fails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But indeed, I'm not very satisfied. I mean, we do use machine learning. I was probably one of the first developing machine learning for robots.
Mm-hmm.
In the early days, I was one of the first really teaching robots by demonstration. Now everybody is doing it. We did that in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Using the kinesthetic teaching that was known in motor control, we brought it to robotics. Kinesthetic means that you, like a parents will hold a child and then show to the child, holding the hands of the child and showing to the child how to do things.
Okay.
And that has led to a lot of work on teaching robots by embodying the robot.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yes, for a long time we did use different type of machine learning tools and had the impression we were still in charge. We were still understanding what was going on. It would be a statistical model, but you could plot them. So because you could plot them, you could visualize what was happening. Even though you were in high dimension, you could do slides, you could do reasoning about lower dimensional manifold. But it's impression to understand. Now, when the few times when we train a neural networks and gives us the right solution, I don't have the impression I'm progressing. Yeah, I don't like it because it feels like someone who switched a button of a lamp and then lights come in, but has no understanding of how it come to be in the first place.
Right.
And that's okay if you're in the end user, but it's not okay when you're supposed to be here at a university and you're supposed to be the place where journalists or anybody will come and knock on the door to have some type of explanation of why is it doing this.
Right.
And if it's not doing what you want, is who is going to fix it if we don't understand it? If it's not us at the university, then who is?
Yeah. What are the great mysteries that you would love to crack open? Like, what are the big questions that you think are not sufficiently explained by deep learning, for example? And
yeah, that's what I said before. It's really the act of learning.
the act of learning itself.
I mean, maybe it does explain it, but we don't understand it.
Right.
Not in such a way that we can really. I don't feel that we have. There are a lot of people, I'm not one of them, but there are a number of people who really dig into, let's say it's called theoretical machine learning, who are trying to understand the theory behind all those neural networks, of course. And I'm glad there are some people doing that. 99% of the people in science now, today, using or, quote, developing these are not doing that.
Yes. They're more focused on applications and
which is
performance.
Crazy.
Yes. Well, yeah, you can understand why they would do this, but I totally agree with you that what is really fascinating is to get some deep understanding and knowledge. But it could be that whenever in the history of science we've been able to artificially reproduce some phenomenon in the lab, like electricity or like a falling apple or whatever, it meant that we were also quite close to maybe a deeper theoretical understanding of it. Sometimes understanding the theoretical is before the experiment, like the Higgs boson, or I don't know. But sometimes it's also follows. So I think all those, applied progress with AI and so on, they are a bit frustrating in terms of deep intellectual curiosity, but they might also clear out a landscape of what works and what doesn't, and maybe give us food for thought to come up with a more general theory of learning.
It could be. It could be, and I like the parallel that you're making. Do you know how many publications we have per year?
70,000.
Oh no, that's only for a subdomain.
Okay.
I mean, total, like in medicine, it's the same problem. I just learned that they had 1 million, I don't know how many. So medicine has become so also focused on subdomains, and maybe that's, I don't know.
Right.
So can we build an understanding of the whole when we are so segmented? I'm sorry to say,
what do
but
you
I think we
could be
should
done
slow
about
down.
it?
We should slow down.
We should slow down.
If we want us as human beings
Yeah.
to still understand. If we're happy to possibly develop a new species that may have this understanding, then that's fine.
So I think scarcity of resources might, in fact, maybe enhance creativity, like you see, like, I don't know, like in constraints in poetry, for example, where you have to rhyme and things like this, could sometimes unleash some higher level of creativity.
Yeah, I mean, we know that most people have creativity when they just walk. They think.
Yeah.
I mean, I played chess for a long time. I mean, I remember sometimes just in the middle of the night you have the solution, right? You know, I'm sure it was the same for you. It's the brain continues working if you let the brain work.
Right.
But if you're overflowing it with many different things, then our superb capacity, which you love so much, they gets overwhelmed by other activities.
Right. So it's similar to what we say with social media and like an overflow of information and overstimulation.
Yeah, there is this. I mean, of course, there is the social media, all of that.
You think it's a whole cultural...
It's the entire life that we live, which doesn't leave us much time to do what, I don't know, those big physicists that you've named before used to do.
I think like Henri Poincaré used to go for like 4-hour walks every afternoon, and then he would come back and he had the full theorem proof in his mind.
Yeah, not to mention that they must have worked on the same thing for 10 years and nobody cared.
Right.
That's the other thing. People today are not driven by the quest that you have been asking me for the beginning of this hour.
Yeah.
What drives you? In the sense of what is the scientific quest that drives you?
Yeah.
That's not what people are driven by. They're driven by, I have to publish this paper by that conference. I have to get a degree, you know.
And to formulate interesting quests, it requires a usually quite wide general culture or...
Which takes time.
Yes.
But here we're touching upon something else. Is thanks maybe to AI or other means, is that education may not have to continue the way it does.
Yes.
Ex-cathedra lecture where everybody comes and write what the professor is writing on the board.
Yes.
That's gone. Students love to watch video and watch them at 2 point,
yes.
2x. And so they gain time, and they may have more time for doing other things, which is practice. Practice meaning starting to be in research labs.
Right.
And maybe obviously not from the first year they enter the university, but maybe by the second or third year, they start engaging in these processes of
research,
reflection, assuming research will be done the way that I just described, which is thinking primarily, and not doing and getting it to work.